Yesterday we created EKS Kubernetes cluster, which is a managed Kubernetes cluster, managed by control plane is managed by AWS. And workers also. We created a workers and we added workers. That is again managed by AWS using AWS auto scaling group. If you see, we have EKS cluster, one EKS cluster, and as of now, we have a node group. This node group is nothing but one auto scaling group in AWS, AWS auto scaling. And it has two machines as of now. If you see, that worker, that node group is nothing but one auto scaling group, as we already discussed yesterday. To connect to that Kubernetes cluster, we have one more machine. This machine is connected to the Kubernetes cluster API server using kubectl. We have a kube config file in this server. That kube config file has the Kubernetes cluster information. This kube config file has the Kubernetes cluster information. Our Kubernetes cluster information. We have kubectl installed. We have AWS CLI installed, and AWS CLI is configured with root credential, AWS root credential. So the root will have access to everything. So we deployed application yesterday. As of now, we have two nodes. And as of now, if you see, we deployed one application using this manifest file. We created a deployment. And we created a service of type load balancer. The load balancer got created in the cloud. Now this is our external IP, load balancer IP. This one. This is AWS load balancer. If you go to load balancers in AWS, right, you see there will be a load balancer for that. This load balancer. It's pointing to those two Kubernetes machines. It has created a classic load balancer. And if you see, this is the listener. Load balancer port is 80, instance port is 31529. Now, when we access via load balancer, request is going to the load balancer to the workers. Something like this. Now we have our EKS Kubernetes cluster in Mumbai region. we have a dedicated VPC for our Kubernetes cluster. Now these two are our worker machines. These are our worker machines. So these are our worker machines as of now. There is a pod. There is a pod we deployed. We deployed application. There are two replicas. This is one. Other one is running here. Now, when I create a service of type load balancer, this Kubernetes cluster has created a ELB. ELB in this VPC. This is ELB. So request is going to the load balancer. This is outside of your Kubernetes. This is outside of your Kubernetes cluster. This is your Kubernetes cluster. ELB is external load balancer. So outside of your Kubernetes cluster, we got a load, we got a load balancer. Now from load balancer, it is routing the traffic to those workers on a node IP and node port. From here, we have a Kubernetes on node IP node port, right? Node IP node port. Request is going on node IP and node port. From this, it is going to the pod. This is used with the help of Kubernetes service. Now this is external load balancer. Now from outside, request is going to load balancer to the worker on a node IP node port. If you see, this is the node port basically, our instance port. This is load balancer port. That's why if you see, I'm not using any port. While accessing, I'm not using any port, the default port 80. Then request is going to load balancer. Load balancer is routing the traffic to these two servers on this port, our node port, our service port, this one. Then request is going to the pods. So now, if I have only one pod, our application will not be highly available. If something went wrong with one pod, it may go down. Let me show that. Let me suppose if we have only one pod, now we have two pods. Now we have two pods, as we already know. If something went wrong with one pod, request goes to another pod. If you see, I'm intentionally deleting one pod. But if you see, still our application is fine. Request is going to load balancer is routing the traffic to servers to the service, to the healthy pod. Suppose if we have only one pod, let me scale down, kubectl, scale, deployment. My deployment name is this one, --, replicas 1. Let me scale down to 1. Now we have only one pod. I'm able to access, but let me delete this intentionally. something went wrong with this pod. Now if you see, my service will have an impact. It's from the cache. Okay, it's from the cache. You can maybe try from a different window. It's from the cache. You can try from a different window. Now I have only one pod. I have to do quickly. Now it might be from the cache. You need to do it in a private window so that you can observe. Now let's try to understand the concept of EKS, how EKS is working, right? Now if you see, I have two nodes as of now. Let me scale it to again 2 pods. Now I have two nodes, two Kubernetes workers. I have some pods. I have some pods. Now one pod is running in this machine, another pod is running in this machine. There are a lot of applications we deployed. Now let's assume something went wrong with your Kubernetes worker itself. Now let's assume something went wrong with your Kubernetes worker itself. Now one of the machine, is went down. One of the machine is down. Now what will happen? Now I am intentionally stopping or terminating this server, but because of memory consumption or CPU consumption, your server is not responding. Your node is down. So I'm intentionally stopping. Now what will happen? Now do I get another machine in this cluster? Now I intentionally stop the server. What will happen? So do I get another machine? Now I have only two nodes. This will be down for after some time. I can see this is not in a ready state. This will not be in a ready state. I can see because I intentionally stop the server. After some time, I can see that node is not ready. I stopped one server, right? So I can see, if you see this node is not ready. This node is not ready. Now what will happen now? If you see, since this node is not ready, whatever pod it was running in this node, immediately it moved to another node. Since this node is not ready, whatever pod it is running in that node, it will move to another node now. Here you can see in the same server, in this server, I can see two pods, two replicas. So immediately it moved, but also suppose if I don't have enough space in this server, this node already has a lot of pods. There is no free memory. There are no system resources available. Will Kubernetes scheduler will be able to schedule this pod? Suppose let's assume you don't have enough space in this server. There are already lot of pods, lot of applications are running. Will it able to schedule in this node? As of now, we have a space, it has scheduled. So if it is running out of resources, it will be in a pending state. But how to recover this one? If it is a self-managed, right? You will not get a server automatically. You have to create a server yourself. But do you see now? One new server has been added. Just 31 seconds ago, I got one more worker. If I refresh now, I can see one more server. One more server. If you see, one new server is getting created. So what is this machine? What is this machine? This is again Kubernetes worker machine. So who is creating this machine in the background? Who identified that, right, your worker is down, right? AWS Kubernetes EKS is using AWS, auto scaling concept, AWS auto scaling group. So I can see immediately one new machine got added. Now parts can be scheduled in this machine also. Parts can be scheduled in this machine also. Now you have enough resources, enough nodes in your Kubernetes cluster. I got another machine. Now let's assume you have two machines up and running. Now you are trying to scale the pods. Maybe you are manually scaling the pods, or maybe you are using HPA, horizontal pod auto scalar. You are trying to scale, right? What if your cluster is running out of resources? I need to automatically scale the nodes, cluster auto scalar, right? Now always there are two nodes. Always there are two nodes. I am always having a two nodes, but based on the load on the cluster, I need to scale my cluster also. Now let me show that. But before that, let me do some small modification. Now I have very high configuration server, right? So what I will do while creating a container, I will say minimum. I will say resource request. I will set the resource request. CPU, let me do something like this. Maybe just 100 millicore. Memory 1 GB. Minimum minimum. This is request. This is limits for this container. CPU, I can say like something like this. 200 millicore. Memory, something like this. Now this I am reserving, guys, even though it is not consuming, it is kind of you are reserving. So now I am reserving 1 GB memory. So if minimum this much is there, then only you can create. Even though it is not consumed, Kubernetes will consider it is reserved for future. Now how many pods I can create in my Kubernetes cluster? As of now, I have two nodes. Each node is having 1 GB. Even though it doesn't consume 1 GB, maximum how many pods I can create, because I am saying I want to reserve, like it is like minimum. How many pods I can create now? How many pods I can create? I have 8 GB system, guys, not 1 GB system. I created a worker machines with 8 GB. So 8 GB, two nodes. 8 GB, two nodes. As of now. So let me apply this first. Later I will scale. I am manually scaling. Okay. If you deploy HPA, if you have a metric server, if you deploy HPA, horizontal pod auto scaler, it will scale based on the load, pod auto scaling. So now let me Now let's wait. I got a new pod. So the deployment concept. I got a new pod. Still I have one old pod that will be terminated after minimum ready seconds. The deployment rolling update concept. Now let me scale. Now let me scale. kubectl scale deployment. This is my deployment name. Hyphen replicas. So first let me scale to 10 replicas. I will go step by step. So now it is able to schedule 10 pods. It is able to schedule 10 pods. Now let me scale it to 15. All are running. Now let's see. Already some system pods reserved some CPU and memory. Already some system pods, because not only these pods, there are some other pods which are running in those machines. Get pods all namespaces. If you see, already some pods are running, like some Kubernetes related pods. Now if you observe, even though that is not taking that much memory, right? The Java pods are not taking that much memory, but I reserved. I am saying minimum 1 GB. Now do you see these two parts are in pending state, three parts are in pending state? Why it is in pending state? Why it is in pending state? If you see, why it is in pending state? Because of no resources available. But don't get confused, guys. As of now, I know my complete 8 GB is it, already system is running out of memory. Is system is running out of memory? Like is it 8 GB is completely utilized in the system? No, it is not like that. I am trying, while creating a pod, I said 1 GB request, which means system, your scheduler will consider that this is going to be used in a future. It is kind of, you are reserving the memory. So it is identifying that there is no enough space to schedule this one. Now what is the expectation now? I don't want pods to be in a pending state. I don't want pods to be in a pending state. Pods should be scheduled again. Now is it scaling the cluster as of now? Now instead of two pods, instead of two nodes, if I get another node, guys, volume is different. Surendra, volume is storage, not the system. Volume is basically data. It is not about resources, system. So now what I need, if I have another node, if I have another machine, scheduler might be able to schedule. If I have another node, scheduler might be able to schedule. If you remember yesterday while creating a node group, I have given minimum. How many minimum nodes? 2. Maximum nodes, I have given 5. Cluster scalar, cluster autoscalar. I have not deployed the cluster autoscalar. If I have deployed the cluster autoscalar, that is again one application in the Kubernetes cluster. if I have deployed this cluster autoscaler, what will happen? Whenever that pods are in pending state because of resources unavailability, so that cluster autoscaler will try to trigger a auto scaling in AWS. That cluster autoscaler will try to trigger a auto scaling in AWS so that it will scale from, now if you see, something like this. As of now, minimum 2 desired to maximum 5 in the nodes, right? If I have a cluster autoscaler, if cluster autoscaler identifies that your pods are in a pending state because of no resources available, this cluster autoscaler will try to inform AWS autoscaling to scale. So this cluster autoscaler will change the desired number from 2 to 3. So that AWS autoscaling will try to scale the servers. So I will get another server. So as of now, I have not deployed cluster autoscaler pods. If you see, as of now, I don't have that application cluster autoscaler. Now I have to deploy that cluster autoscaler so that it can scale. Now if you see, this pod is in still pending state, it is not able to schedule. These 3 pods are in a pending state. It is not able to schedule because we don't have enough resources in the cluster. Now to deploy a cluster autoscaler, we need to do something. Now let me show that YML. I'll share that. We just created a EKS cluster yesterday. Now I need to deploy this cluster autoscaler, this application. I need to deploy this cluster autoscaler. I am creating a deployment. In which namespace? In kube system namespace. I am using this image, cluster autoscaler image. Who created this image? Is it our application image? It's not our application image. It's a Kubernetes application. So what this cluster autoscaler will do? What this cluster autoscaler will do, right? It will try to scale your cluster. It will try to scale your cluster if your cluster is running out of resources. So if you see, we are creating a deployment. Along with the deployment, we are creating lot of things. If you see, we are creating service account. We are creating a service account. We are creating a role, cluster role, cluster role binding, and role binding. Then deployment. So we will discuss in detail, but let me give a brief overview about what is service account, what is cluster role, what is role, and what is role binding. Now I am trying to deploy one application, cluster autoscaler. This cluster autoscaler will try to increase the nodes or decrease the nodes based on the information which it has, right? Now this is one application. This application require access to the API server. Why it require access to the API server? Because it will scale up, scale down based on the pod status, So how can this application has to know, right? This application has to know how many nodes are there, right? How many pods are there, whether all the pods are scheduled or is there any pod in a pending state. So this application has to know all the details, then only it can take a decision whether to scale up, scale down. So this container, this application has to have access to the API server. It has to talk to the API server. It has to have access to the API server. So without having access to the API server, this application will it able to gather that information, guys, from the API server? If I deploy any application, will it able to talk to the API server and get all the required details? It is not like that. It requires a permission. So this application, for this application, if you see, I am saying this is the service account. This is the service account. It is like a user. For this application, I am trying to set a user like service account, like a functional ID. Functional ID, it is like a functional ID. You are creating a service account. It is not a regular user, like a functional user. So for this user, we created a service account. This is the service account name, cluster auto scalar. That is what we are giving here. So for this service account, we are giving a permissions. If you see, we are creating a role. Now do you see what permissions I am giving, right? For pods, I am giving a permission, right? Create permission, this one. Pod status, it can update the pod status. Nodes, what it can, nodes permission, what I can, what permissions I am giving for a node level. It can watch the nodes, it can list the nodes, it can get the nodes, and it can update the nodes, right? If you see, I am giving permissions for each and every Kubernetes object which is required for pods, services, replication controllers. I am giving watch, list, get, all read-only permissions. For stateful sets, replica sets, daemon sets, again permissions, right? This is like a role. You are creating a role. You are creating a role with specific permissions. This role are linked with this service account. This role is linked with this service account in the cluster role binding. So we have a role binding. Here you are linking role with your service account. So you are giving a permissions to this application. You are giving a permissions to this application. What permission? API permissions. So that it can talk to the API server. It can update the objects. It can read the objects from API server. So these are also we are getting created. So we are trying to deploy all the objects. Service account is one Kubernetes object. Cluster role, we call it as a RBAC in Kubernetes. Role based access control. Role based access control. Guys, if you observe, while deploying a metric server also we created a service account. For metric server also we are giving a permissions, API permissions with the help of service account, right? If you see metric server YML, if you see metric server YML, which we deployed, right? If you see, some of the YML, if you see, we have a role binding. Somewhere we have created a role. Yeah, here. If you see, we are giving a permissions. What permissions? It can read pod information, it can list pods, how many pods, it can watch pods, it can watch nodes, right? We are giving a permissions, we are creating a service account. That service account is linked with role with the help of role binding. So this service account we are using in that application YML. If you see service account. Service account is like a user, functional user, using which you are giving a permissions to the applications. What permissions? Your Kubernetes permissions, Kubernetes API permissions to that application which are getting deployed in the Kubernetes cluster. So now I need to deploy this. I need to deploy this cluster autoscaler with required role, right? We are trying to deploy so that this cluster autoscaler can talk to the API server. So it will identify how many parts are there, how many are in pending state. If it is in pending state, it will try to talk to the AWS. It will try to talk to the AWS and it will increase the nodes. So before deploying this, first I need to create one AWS policy. Before deploying this cluster autoscaler, I need to deploy one AWS policy. I need to create one AWS policy. That policy has to be attached to the worker nodes, right? You have to attach this policy again to your worker group, because this application you are deploying, which may come in any Kubernetes worker. So AWS permissions, this guy will try to talk to the AWS, it will try to talk to the AWS. So it requires AWS permissions, it requires these permissions, auto scaling permissions in AWS. So we are trying to give a auto scaling permissions to the workers so that the application, whatever it is running in that worker, can talk to the AWS. So before deploying, if I deploy this, it will not work, guys. Now if you see, let me first deploy this one. Guys, make sure, if you see, I have given one instruction here. Deploy cluster autoscaler using below YML. Make sure you update your cluster name next to this option. You have to update your cluster name properly. Now here, this has to be replaced with your cluster name, your EKS cluster name. So make sure you do that. So now let me show you what is the problem. Even though I have a cluster autoscaler, it will not able to schedule. Let me show that. Now here, make sure you update your cluster name. Make sure you update your cluster name. My cluster name is, I think, EKS underscore demo. EKS underscore demo. So EKS underscore demo. Now I am going to deploy a cluster autoscaler. I may not able to schedule this one also. Let me try, because already system lot of pods reserved the memory. Let me see. Now let's see whether I have a cluster autoscaler pods running. Yeah, it is running because it is requesting very less memory, right? It is able to schedule. this cluster autoscaler is requesting very less memory, 100 millicore CPU, 300 MB of memory. So there is this much is available. So it is scheduled. Now if you see, the expectation is this will watch or this will talk to the API server and it will identify the pod status. It will try to scale the nodes, the cluster based on the pod status. But if you see, just see the logs, kubectl logs, your pod logs. In kube system namespace. Now if you see, what is the problem now? It has identified that it has to schedule, it has to scale. Now if you see what is the status, what is the problem inside this? This EKS node, we have created one IAM role for EKS workers, right? So for auto scaling of your EKS cluster, you need some permissions, AWS permissions. For auto scaling of EKS cluster, you deployed this application. This application is running in one of the worker. That worker doesn't have enough resource, enough permissions, AWS permissions to perform this. So now what I need to do? I should first create one policy. That policy has auto scaling permissions. We are giving auto scaling permissions. Create this policy and attach this policy to the IAM role, which is used in EKS node group. AWS concept, AWS IAM. So let me go to AWS. Now if you see guys, as of now, this EKS cluster, we have a one worker group. This worker group is having, as of now, this worker group is having this IAM role. This IAM role has some EKS related policies, but it requires auto scaling policies also. So we don't have. These policies doesn't have these permissions. Now I need these permissions also. So now let me create a policy. You can do something like this. If you can directly go to the roles, go to the role which you are using, or maybe first you can create a policy, whatever way. Go to IAM, go to policies, create a policy, have this one. Now give a name. I am saying EKS auto scalar, something like this policy. EKS auto scalar policy. Create this policy. Now let's go to roles. Go to this EKS role, EKS node role, which you used in the node group. Click on this attach policies. Search with that EKS autoscalar policy, this one. Attach. Now this IAM role is already been used with your worker machine. So your autoscalar, your cluster autoscalar pod is running in your worker machine, so that the cluster autoscalar application will be able to do the required job. Now let's try to redeploy this one, because I first shown the error. Then I fix the issue. Let's reapply this. Now this cluster autoscalar is running in this namespace. So let me delete this. If you see, this is not working because of the permissions, right? So let me reapply. Let me delete kubectl get all. Let me see what controller is managing this in the kube system namespace. So this cluster autoscalar is deployed as a deployment. So this is my deployment name. Kubectl delete deployment. My deployment name -n kube system namespace. It is in a kube system namespace. Now let me apply that YML again. Now again deployment got created. Your pod got created. Now if you see your pod logs, now cluster autoscalar pod logs, it has a permissions now. Now it has identified that it has to schedule. Now do you see? It has identified, like, do you see this has identified that 3 pods are in unschedulable state? It has identified that 3 pods are in unschedulable state. Now what it is saying? Upcoming 1 nodes. So it is trying to identify pod status and it is trying to scale, right? Now if I go and check, I may see one more machine, third machine. Now you can see here, I got another machine is getting created. Now where these 3 pods will be scheduled? In that new node. Now I can see kubectl get all. Do you see all those 3 pods in a running state now? Whatever it was unschedulable here earlier, 3 pods, it has scheduled again. So this cluster autoscalar is talking to the AWS and it is increasing the nodes. Now I have a 3 machines instead of 2 machines. I have a 3 machines. Pods are getting scheduled. Now let me scale up again these pods. Kubectl scale deployment. This deployment name -hyphen replicas. I think now I have total 15 replicas. Now let me say 20 replicas. Let's see what will happen. So now again some pods are getting created. Again 2 are in pending state. Again, why these 2 are in pending state? Because I am reserving 1 GB. So as of now, it is not able to find a system. Where 1 GB is available. Now again, will I get another node? Unschedulable. Now it has triggered the scale up, right? Now will I get another node, guys? Fourth node. Will I get another node? As of now, I have a 3 nodes. Now if you see the logs, again, your cluster autoscalar logs. Now again, it has identified that these two parts are not scheduled. Again, what it is doing? Is it scaling? Now do I see fourth node again? 37 seconds ago, just now, I got another node. I got another node. Again, in that node, these parts got scheduled. Now let me scale up again. But how many maximum it can scale the nodes? How many nodes it can scale maximum? Now let me say again 25. Now I am trying to scale it to 25. Again, one is in pending state. Already I have 4 nodes. Maximum how many nodes it can scale up, guys? That cluster autoscalar. Maximum how many? If you see, again this is in pending state. Again I will get another node. One more node. 5 nodes maximum. Why maximum is 5? Why can't it create sixth one? Because while creating a node group, while creating a node group, while creating a node group, if you see this node group in detail, minimum, maximum, 5. So desired is getting updated based on the load. The cluster autoscalar is going to update the desired so that it will increase. Now if you see, I will get a fifth node also. Now I got a fifth node. It is not yet completely ready. Once it is ready, whatever pods which are in pending state, this one will be scheduled in that once the node is completely ready. Now do you see, once the node is ready, it is getting scheduled. Whatever is in pending, it is getting scheduled. Container is getting created. Now it cannot scale more than 5 because of the maximum limit which we have given. So this is how we can create highly available Kubernetes cluster, and again we can scale the cluster also. So based on the load, you can scale your pods. If pods are not able to schedule, if you have a cluster autoscalar, it will scale the cluster also. So try to understand the difference, guys. Our pod autoscaling is different. Pod autoscalar is different. Cluster autoscalar is different. Pod autoscalar. Can I achieve this in any Kubernetes cluster? Can I achieve this in a self-managed or cloud-managed, whatever it is? Can I achieve pod autoscalar in a self-managed Kubernetes cluster or cloud-managed Kubernetes cluster? Yes, we can achieve. But what if pods are not able to schedule? If because of no system resources available in self-managed, can I achieve this? Cluster autoscalar in self-managed, it's not possible. Right? So EKS is managed. EKS is managed Kubernetes. cluster. Managed service, managed. AWS will manage. Control plane will be completely managed by AWS, and we have a node group. We are creating a node group. This node group is nothing but one AWS auto scaling group. So we can scale nodes by deploying a cluster auto scalar. So this is how it is working. Now let me scale to again let me scale to 32. Now there will be some parts which will be in a pending state. This will not be scheduled. Now you can see there are two parts which are in pending state. Now if you see your logs, cluster autoscalar logs, if you see your cluster autoscalar logs, right, you can see it will say what it is saying. Already maximum limit is reached. You can see maximum limit is reached. Not able to trigger the scale up. Why it is not able to trigger the scale up? It is not able to. Why it is not able to scale your nodes? Because already sorry guys, because already maximum limit is reached. What is the maximum nodes I have mentioned while creating a cluster? While creating a cluster, I have mentioned maximum 5. Already 5 nodes are there. Already 5 nodes are there. 5 nodes are already in place. So it will not able to scale because the cluster autoscaler will not scale because it is already reached the maximum. Maximum limit is reached. Now, in this cluster, we created a one node group. So 5 maximum is already reached. Now you can see maximum is 5, already 5 nodes are there. So if you want to change, you can change here now. Instead of 5 now, I can change it something like this. 6. Now since I changed it to 6, again you can see I will get another node. Since I changed it to 6, this cluster autoscaler will keep on trying, right? After some time, it will try to create. Now you can see already it has identified that it can scale. So after some time, you can see that node also will be created, 6 nodes. You will see another node after some time. Based on the load, it will scale up. Based on the load, it will scale up the nodes, cluster autoscaler. Now you can see I got another node now. Now whatever pod which is in pending state, that will be scheduled to this node. These two parts are in pending state, right? This will be scheduled in that new node, whatever I'm getting now. EKS is basically highly available production ready Kubernetes cluster, high availability, fault tolerance, scalability, right? So any application expects these factors: high availability, scalability, again manual scaling and auto scaling. Fault tolerance, scalability, this elasticity is nothing, scalability and elasticity. Elasticity is auto scaling, scalable. Now if I use Kubernetes, only I am talking about Kubernetes. If I am deploying my applications as a pods, will I have a high availability in my application if one of your pod goes down? Is your Kubernetes is able to recreate that pod? Can I achieve high availability if I deploy my application as a container and that container is orchestrated by Kubernetes? Can I achieve high availability in my application? I am talking about application level. Can I achieve high availability in application if I deploy my application as a Kubernetes pod and Kubernetes is going to make sure your application is highly available? Can I scale my pods? Can I scale my replicas, pod replicas if I use Kubernetes? Guys, yes, no? Can I, is it fault tolerated? Is our Kubernetes pods are fault tolerated, which means if one of your pod, your process went down, will it recreate fault tolerance? Elasticity. Will I able to automatically scale my number of pods? HPA. Can I achieve this? Will it able to scale our replicas, our application replicas if I use Kubernetes? Application level, Kubernetes is taking care. What about infrastructure? If your Kubernetes has to work properly, you should have enough infrastructure. So now, is AWS is taking care all these things in a infrastructure level? To work Kubernetes properly, you should have enough systems, enough servers. Now, who is managing high availability of your control plane, your Kubernetes control plane, like API server, scheduler, AWS. And scalability, nodes, our worker nodes, node group. What concept it is using? The scalability, fault tolerance, elasticity, basically auto scaling of your nodes. This will be taken care by AWS. There is a concept called auto scaling group. Auto scaling group in AWS. So this auto scaling group will make sure you have a minimum number of servers. We are using cluster autoscaler, one application. We deployed one cluster autoscaler, one application. This cluster autoscaler is talking to the AWS autoscaling to scale up, scale down. Okay. So AWS is managing your infrastructure, Kubernetes infrastructure. I can achieve these things. I can achieve these things in a self-managed Kubernetes cluster at application level. But what about infrastructure level? If your worker itself is gone, your parts will go down. Will it schedule a new worker in a self-managed? Self-managed, you have to manage everything yourself. So that is how EKS is working. Now you can see those parts also got scheduled. Now I will scale down. I will scale down my pods. I don't need these many pods. Suppose I am using HPA, horizontal pod autoscaler. Now there is no load on this application. There is no load on this application. It will scale down automatically. Your pods will scale down. If your pods are scaled down, Your pods are scaled down. Do you need 6 nodes now? If there is no load on your application pods got scaled down. And do I need a 6 servers now? Do we need 6 servers? So now what will happen to the nodes? Who will scale down the nodes? Now I already have a 6 nodes. My Kubernetes doesn't have that much load. Now what will happen to these nodes? Will it scale down? Nodes also will be scaled down automatically. Will nodes also get scaled down automatically? AWS auto scaling, guys. It has to scale down. Now who will take care about that? That cluster auto scalar application which we deployed in the cluster. You can see after some time, it will identify that. Now you can see itself. It has identified that 2 nodes cannot be removed because there are some parts which are running in that node. It will not, it is calculating the scale down. It is saying ignoring 2 nodes because it has some parts. Now there are 4 nodes. The utilization is very less and there are no parts running in this node. There are no parts running in this node. Now, is it scaling down these 4 nodes? It is saying these nodes are not used for so much time, like this much from last 1 minute or 2 minutes. These nodes are not being used, right? So from last 2 minutes, these nodes are not used because there is no pods. Now after some time, it will wait for some time. After some time, it will start terminating these nodes. It will reduce. It will talk to the AWS auto scaling. It will talk to the AWS auto scaling. And it will reduce the desired number. It will reduce the desired number. But always how many it will maintain? Always how many it will maintain, guys? How many nodes will be there? Always. Minimum nodes. Always minimum nodes. Minimum nodes is 2. 2 nodes minimum. Now it is calculating from last 3 minutes, these pods, these nodes are not being used. So it will wait for 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes. If none of the pods are scheduled in that node, if none of the pods are scheduled in that node, it will try to delete those nodes. It will try to reduce the number of replicas, number of nodes. Now we can wait for some time. After some time, you can see as of now, I have 6 nodes, 6 machines, workers. So that cluster autoscaler will update this desired. It will update this desired. So instead of 6, it will say 2, so that it will scale down. Your AWS auto scaling concept. If you see your AWS auto scaling, here, that cluster autoscaler will talk to the AWS auto scaling. It will update this desired capacity. If you see this activity, right, in the background, what is happening? That cluster autoscaler is updating the desired capacity. If you see, it is updating the desired capacity from 2 to 3. So it to match desired capacity, AWS has increased to 3 servers. Again, it is updating the desired capacity from 3 to 4. So AWS has created one more server. It is updating the desired capacity from 4 to 5, that cluster auto scalar. So it is started creating a servers to match the desired number. Now after some time, it will update the desired state and it will terminate these servers. Now I can see 6 worker machines are there. Now after some time, that cluster auto scalar will scale down. So from last 5 minutes, none of the pods got scheduled in these nodes. So this will be terminated after some time. So let's wait. We will wait for some time. Meantime, I'll try to explain this. Now I am accessing the application like this. Whatever application I have deployed in a Kubernetes cluster, I am accessing using something like this. But is it human readable domain? Can we, like, I deployed one application. Can I give this URL to the users who who want to use my application? Will they able to remember this? So this is not human friendly URL, human friendly domain. I am using directly ELB DNS name. Instead of this, if I have a domain, I can map this load balancer with my domain name. I can map my load balancer with the domain so that I can access using domain name. So if you don't have a domain, how can you practice, right? If you really want to access, or if you really want to feel I am using a domain, if you don't have a domain, how can you practice, right? You can get the IP address of this load balancer in your Windows. If suppose you are using Windows laptop, end user laptop. If you are using Windows, in your host file, in your Windows host file, you can give load balancer IP and whatever name you want to give, suppose something like this. In your Windows, in your client machine where you are accessing, you need to give a load balancer IP, this load balancer IP, and whatever domain you want to use, so that you can access only from your system. You can get the IP address of this load balancer and you can update in your host file if you want to really feel you are using domain name. You are trying to access using domain name. If you don't have a domain, you can update your host file. Since I am using MacBook, in my MacBook, I have a host file, my local laptop, guys, not any machine, not in AWS machine, right? So in my laptop, this is my Mac terminal. I have a etc. In etc, I have a host file. In this host file, I can do something like this. In host file, I can give my load balancer IP. I can identify the load balancer IP. This is my load balancer for that service. You can execute this command so that you will get a IP address of this load balancer. If you don't have this command, you install this software. You install this software, bind utils. You install this software, that NS lookup will work. Now you can use this IP address. You can use either this one or this one, any IP. That is your load balancer IP. So that load balancer IP locally, it is like a local DNS, not global DNS. I am mapping that load balancer IP address with some domain, something like this. Since you don't have a domain, you are doing it locally. Now from my browser, I can access something like this, javawebapp.com. That request is going to that load balancer to your Kubernetes. Inside this, I have a pod. I mean to say inside this is my application context. Now I can access something like this from my laptop. But for you, will it work? I pinged you that URL in the chat box. Do you guys able to access? Do you guys able to access something like this? No. That is because I am not doing this DNS mapping at global DNS servers. So if you don't have a domain, while you are practicing, what you can do, you grab the load balancer IP, you grab the load balancer IP of your service, you grab this load balancer IP, any IP, and in your Windows machine, if you are using Windows machine, you need to update in your Windows machine host file. Since I am using Mac, I have done in this file. So it will work only for you. But in real time, do you do like something like this? Does any application like or any client is going to do some changes, something like this? No, right? So every application will have a domain. The domain will be globally mapped. The domain will be globally mapped. Guys, do you know where is host file in Windows machine, your laptop? Or do you need me to help to locate that host file if you want to practice? Do you know where is host file in your Windows machine? In real time, none of the client will do that. But as a technical guy, do you know where is host file in your Windows machine? It will be there in C Windows System 32, the drivers. So you follow these instructions if you want to edit. Okay. So now let me do it globally. I have a domain. I purchased a domain. So I have a domain from different provider. I have a domain from GoDaddy. I have a GoDaddy account where I have a domain. I purchased one domain. I purchased one domain. This is my domain. Okay. Now, what I need to do, right? I need to map this domain with my load balancer. I need to map this domain with the load balancer. As of now, my infrastructure is in AWS, my domain is in a different provider, right? In AWS also there is a DNS service, right? There is a concept of Route 53. There is a service called Route 53. You can purchase domain from AWS also if required. But I have purchased from a different vendor. So here itself you can purchase. Suppose you want to purchase the domain, go to AWS, go to Route 53. If you want to purchase, you can register your domain here itself. But I have registered in a different provider. Suppose you need some domain .com or .co.in or whatever, right? For practicing purpose, for very less charge also you will get like $7, $9, $12, right? If you see, if I purchase this .xyz domain, $12 per year, right? There are something like $9 for practicing purpose. If you want to purchase, you can purchase. I already purchased a domain in a different provider. I already purchased the domain in a different provider. So I cannot purchase this again because this is already purchased by someone else, right? This is not available, flipkart.com, right? Gmail. So whatever domain you have, right, you can purchase. So I already have this purchased, Mithun Tech DevOps. .com might be available, but I don't have a .co.in because I purchased .co.in, .co.in. If you try that one, it will not, you will not get. So I already have a domain. If you don't have a domain, you can purchase, you can add to cart, you can pay the money so that yearly they will charge this much. I already have a domain from a different provider, so I'm not going to purchase here. So now I already have a domain. So what I will do, I will map that domain with my load balancer. I need to do settings at two places because my infrastructure is in AWS. I purchased domain in Route 53. I have to modify something in two places. So first what you need to do, I already have a hosted zone created. Let me delete the hosted zone. I will show from the scratch. First I need to delete these record sets. This is name server record set. So now let me delete the hosted zone. This is AWS concept, DNS concept. It's nothing to do with Kubernetes. Now I have a domain from GoDaddy and my infrastructure is in AWS. So I need to do two things. First, in my AWS, I need to create a hosted zone. Click on create hosted zone. And this is my domain, this is my domain, Mithun Tech DevOps.co.in. This is my domain which I purchased. If you see, this is my domain, Mithun Tech DevOps.co.in. With the domain name, I am creating a hosted zone. Again, I am creating a public hosted zone. It is not a private. Private in the sense within the network, you can access this domain, not outside the network. So since this is public application, I am trying to create a public hosted zone. Guys, this is nothing to do with Kubernetes, AWS. So I created a hosted zone. For this hosted zone, I got a name servers. We call it as a name servers. I got these name servers. these name servers I have to update in my provider, DNS provider. I have to update these name servers here in the DNS provider. Suppose you purchase domain from AWS itself, you no need to do anything. Here, I will change these name servers, whatever it was there earlier. I will remove those and I will update the new name servers. So make sure you don't have any. Right? So I updated name servers in my DNS provider. Yes, I want to confirm. Now here I need to, now let's come back to this. I updated name servers. Why is it not reflecting? Is it still using old name servers? 60, 27, 22, 40. It is still using old. Maybe it's
Welcome to VoiceOver. VoiceOver speaks descriptions on.
is it still reflecting old or new? 58. Yeah, now it's reflected. So I created a hosted zone in my AWS and I updated those name servers in DNS provider. Now here I need to create a record set. I need to map the domain with that load balancer. Now click on create set, create record. Select this simple, simple routing if you have a domain. Now, if you want to create a subdomain, something like this, Java web app dot mithuntechdevops.co.in or www.mithuntechdevops.co.in, right? If you don't want to give anything, just this is using this you can access. Now, I want to access something like this, Java web app dot mithuntechdevops.co.in, right? Like subdomain. So if I am accessing something like this, Java web app dot mithuntechdevops.co.in. So request should go to which one now? The load balancer. I am trying to map a load balancer. Here select this one. Alias here. Alias to application and classic load balancer. Select this one. Now my load balancer is in which region? Where is my Kubernetes cluster? My Kubernetes cluster is in Mumbai region, Asia Pacific, Mumbai, and select that load balancer. This is the load balancer. Now create record set. Now I can access my application something like this. So request goes to DNS from laptop, request goes to DNS servers. Now in the global DNS, I have updated. Now I will be able to access, but it will take some time, guys. DNS may take any time between, like sometimes it will take 1 hour to 24 hours also to reflect in all the DNS. Now for me, it's already started working. For me, it's already started working. So let me share that URL. Now do you guys try to access with this URL and let me know you guys are able to access. But some of the regions it may not work, guys. DNS lookup, let me, or DNS checker. But for some of the regions it will not work. This is my domain, mithuntechdevops.co.in or Java, that is there, right? Java web app dot. Now if you see, For most of the regions, it's already reflecting. Today it's very fast, but usually it will take some time. Usually it will take some time, but now I can see this is resolving to IP address in all the DNS servers. I can see everywhere it's reflecting. So now this is how you can access with the DNS, right? It is nothing to do with Kubernetes. Now I mapped my domain name with the load balancer, which is created for my application. With this domain, I mapped. Now we are able to access something like this. So my application is, I'm able to access my application with the help of DNS. Now this is one very, very important question, guys. In the interview, they are asking, can you explain, can you tell me how end user request will reach Kubernetes pod? If you are using Kubernetes, what is the flow? From browser, from end user, browser or system. First request goes to which one, guys? Will it directly go to our load balancer from end user? In end user browser, I am accessing something like this. You are accessing something like this. Java web app dot something like this. You are accessing something like this. You are accessing something like this. So first request goes to which one? First request goes to DNS servers, DNS lookup. Are we owning these DNS servers, guys? Is it in our control? These DNS servers is in our control. We are just registering, but it is not owned by us. ISP, Internet Service Provider. So they will manage these DNS servers. DNS servers. From DNS server, it will resolve the IP. From DNS server, again you will get back the IP address. You will get the IP address to your system. That for that domain, what is the IP address? So you will get the response from the DNS to again your laptop. Then it will goes to load balancer to Kubernetes node and node port on a node port. Then service, your Kubernetes service, from service to pod. End user request will first go to DNS from your laptop. You connect to the network. Your internet provider, your ISP will have some DNS servers configured. If you see, first request is going to these DNS servers to identify the IP address of that domain. Then request goes to load balancer to the your Kubernetes machines to the pods. Now, since I am using sorry, since I am using Kubernetes to deploy my application, can I do the updates? Can I do the deployment even though end users are using now? Can I do the deployment without causing the downtime? If you want to really do, can I do the zero downtime deployments in this cluster? You guys are accessing that application. Can I do the zero downtime deployment? Now you guys access the application. I can modify my image. I can do the deployment in the background because I am using rolling. If I have this version of the image, I am doing a rolling update. Now I am doing a deployment in the background. As an end user, can you access while doing a deployment? Are you guys able to access? Do you see any issue while I am doing in the deployment in the background? Now still one old pod is running. one old pod is still running. Request is going to that pod, right? Request is going to that pod, and again new pods got created successfully. Once these new pods are ready, the old pod will be terminated. The old pod will be terminated. Okay. So this is how we can use. Okay. So tomorrow we will continue with one more concept called ingress. We will continue with one more concept called ingress resource and ingress controller. We will discuss. Still these concepts has to be discussed, guys. RBAC, Helm, Prometheus and Grafana. These topics still we have to cover. So tomorrow we'll continue with this. Tomorrow class timing is 7 to 9 a.m. If required, in between we will take 10 minutes break. If required, we will take 10 minutes break in between. Okay. So tomorrow also I am planning to take. So tomorrow we'll have a class from 7 a.m. IST to 9 a.m. IST. Okay. So tomorrow we'll continue on ingress, guys.